Alfred Korzybski is assisting me today in ways protected by paper, fortunately, but he's given me new heights. I had to find something I could stand on. Okay, so in 2001, I taught a course called Critical Interpretation. I was new to Grand Valley State University, and I was excited that there was no assigned textbook and that there was a lot of freedom in the kinds of things that I could teach. Robert Mayberry had shown, actually Corey, who also taught the class, this article that was useful for talking about perception, conception, and interpretation. That was the title of the lecture that he gave. And it was published in a book called The Problem of Christianity. And I read it, and it really helped me because I had never really closely thought about what is interpretation, and I wanted to understand the title of my class. Unfortunately, I thought that the article was rather hard to read for undergraduates, and for years I wanted to try and recast the ideas in an easier to consume or clear and also updated examples kind of a context, and I got the chance on a sabbatical. The product is going to be published in etc. Thank you very much, and that'll be coming out soon. So the ideas here are coming from that article, which I think makes more sense when it's accompanied by all the examples that I give to really fill out some of the ideas. I'm going to have to be a little brief with those. But when I was writing the essay, it was brought to my attention that Josiah Royce was on a list of famous people that Alfred Korzybski had put in the beginning of his book, Science and Sanity. There were almost 40 people, including Leibniz, Socrates, Newton, Plato, Freud, Aristotle, and then Josiah Royce was on the list. So I think that Royce's appearance on Korzybski's list of greats may explain the family resemblance between Korzybski's notion of time binding and Royce's explanation of interpretation. So to make this argument, I need to talk about perception and conception, because these are terms that have been kicked around by many philosophers over the years in different ways. And then explain Royce's claims about the triadic nature of interpretation, and then finally link Royce's triadic notion of interpretation to Korzybski's understanding of time binding. So to understand interpretation, you need to understand how interpretation is a different mental process from perception and conception. So these are three mental processes that were discussed by Royce. So first we're going to talk about perception. Perceptions are taken in through the senses. So it's what's seen or smelled or touched or tasted, or even, with orientation and balance. And once we label a perception like a taste, it's no longer the perception, it's a label, it's a concept. So it's very hard to talk about perception because it's always a paradox. But, whatever's out there that right now, if you feel hot or if you feel cool or somebody pokes you in the shoulder, those are all perceptions, and then as soon as you label it, it becomes something. But the perceptual realm, what James called the blooming, buzzing confusion, is just what it is. So we'll have to live with the conundrum. Perceptions are continuous, which means they're constantly coming in. You can close your eyes and try not to perceive, but you're closing off the amount that's coming in. Your perceptions are always taking stuff in, whether you try to close your ears or not, and there's good reasons not to close your ears. And perceptions are something that all animals have. So we are, along with all other animals, perceptual beings. It varies from organism to organism. Some birds have better eyesight than we do. Some people, it varies from species to species and from organism to organism. So some people are colorblind. But in any event, perception is also dyadic, which means it's a two-part thing. So there's the organism, and it's perceiving something out in the world. It's dyadic, two-part thing. And no two organisms perceive the same thing in exactly the same way, and no two people do. Even if they're standing next to each other, they're taking a slightly different angle on things. So there's always a little something that's different about perceptions. They're unique to us, even though we share them through words. And that brings us to concepts. So concepts, unlike percepts, are classifications or categorizations or namings. Some concepts are percepts given a label, like a cloud. If you see something, you name it a cloud, or a frog, or even the croak of a frog. Other concepts label things that humans have made up, like a credit score or justice, which is, you don't see, but we still play with those words as if they are things. So concepts can be used by a few people or by many, but regardless of, its currency, each concept is for only one thing. This means that unlike percepts, concepts are discrete, they're bounded, they have a beginning and an end. Obviously, we tinker a little bit with the boundaries, but typically when you see a dog, you call it a dog and not a cat, and a car is not a marriage, and a table isn't a chair unless you start using it that way. So there are borderline cases, but we'll stick with the solid cases. Unlike percepts, concepts can exist separate from perceptual groundings. So we can talk about, let's say, the color red without having to see it. We can talk about it as a thing. Some animals have the capability to conceptualize in some ways, but it's really basic. So when you say walk to a dog, gets excited, but you can't tell it, we're going to have to take a walk tomorrow. It's just going to get excited in the now from the thing that it understands that concept. So, but humans are we use a lot of concepts in our language, and that makes us unique. And that's how we share and create our reality. And like perception, conception is also dyadic. So the two-part relationship of conception is between the concept and then the class or category of things that it refers to. So it's a two-part relationship. And so here we have two mental processes, perception and conception, but we still don't have the answer to some very important questions. For example, how do people learn new concepts? How do we change the boundaries of an old concept to include things that it didn't include before, like citizen? How can we communicate with someone when we perceive the world differently, especially if there have been a lot of perceptions over time that are really different? These and other questions can't be easily answered with what perception and conception give us by themselves. So this is where Royce comes in. Royce presents interpretation as a third, unique mental process. Royce says interpretation is, and I love this quote, and this is what I always hang on, concern for your neighbor's mind or any conscious acts of that mind. So interpretation is concern for your neighbor's mind or any conscious acts of that mind. So what is your neighbor's mind? We can talk about whether AI is a neighbor, but your neighbor's mind could mean your own past and future mind. It could mean any other person's mind or any other people's minds or group of people's minds. Minds are not concepts, and they're not there in any traditional sense in the same way that justice isn't there. You can't really hold on to it. We don't see others' minds walking up the driveway, but we can still believe minds exist and we treat them as real. Some of us do. Any conscious act of a mind could mean something like speech, writing, drawing, art, film, video, poetry, anything, any evidence of what a neighbor might have created or left a trace of in space or time. It's a pretty broad category. And what about concern or concern for your neighbor's mind? What is concern? Well, concern is interest, whether for good or ill. I always sort of imagined it as caring, but there are people who are concerned with other people's minds and they don't care about those people. They're concerned about their minds so that they can manipulate them. So concerns about your neighbor's mind make up human community, and some of those are key to the survival of those communities. So Royce says that unlike perception and conception, interpretation is triadic. It's triadic because it follows a three-part pattern. That pattern is A interprets B to C. So it's a three-part thing that holds things together. The three-part pattern can characterize individuals or collectives. So on an individual level, you can, as individuals in the present, that's the first part, can interpret the past self, that's the second part, to some future self, and that's the third part. For example, we might look at a recent picture and decide it's time to go on a diet. You look at the past self, you look at the present self, you think of the future self. Or we might think of how poorly we responded to a situation in the past and promise to do things differently the next time. That's interpretation. Interpretation can also link individuals to each other, as when we try to explain one person's behavior to another person. Oh, she did that because she's jealous, it's okay. Or or when we try to translate ideas from one language, context, or culture to another. In the case of translating writing, there's a lot of different ways to do that, and it's difficult to decide on particular words. When we interpret collectively, we as some collective body, the first part, interpret some happening or a historical event in the past. That's the second part, to some future collective that we would hope to be. So anytime that we're trying to make decisions about the future of a country or the decisions that they make, we'd be in that category. So interpretation is a uniquely three-part relationship. With perception, a human or other animal perceives some quality or feature. That's a two-part relation. With conception, a human or other animal classifies or categorizes something. That's a two-part relation. But interpretation is triadic. It connects people across space and time as selves and communities, enhanced by literacy, our ability to interpret our own and others' interpretations, and to interpret those interpretations is astounding and nearly infinite. So Royce's triadic mental process of interpretation is reflected in the words of Alfred Korzybski. Korzybski's scholarly and scientific approach to questions of humanity and human progress identifies time binding as a uniquely human faculty. In his Manhood of Humanity, the Science and Art of Human Engineering, Korzybski writes, time binding is the capacity of an individual or a generation to begin where the former left off. The time-binding class of life differs from other beings that are at best space binders or chemistry binders. Space binders are living things that can move about in space. These organisms include not just mammals, but fish, birds, reptiles, insects, and so on. And chemistry binders are living things that can bind chemicals into themselves. Humans can do this, but some organisms can only do this, like plants and algae. So time binding is a unique level of interaction in the world accomplished through language and culture. Humans are able to gather up histories and imagine futures across time. As with interpretation, this can be done by individuals or groups. For Korzybski, science is an example of the success of time binding. I don't know if it's always so successful, but I understand the idea of building on previous people's works. And some mental illnesses are examples of its failure, as when people look in the past and change something to make themselves get worse and worse from that cycle. The profound fact about time binding is there's no going back. We sentence ourselves to the past at every moment, and it's the same with Royce's interpretation. The triadic nature of interpretation means that when a person takes one path in life, they don't take another. It means when a collective, like a business or an organization or a city or country, makes one decision, it doesn't take another. This should not be a paralyzing thought. Hopefully it motivates us. The portion of our lives within our control may be slim, but small changes can sometimes yield unanticipated results in one's own self and in groups. And humans have choices about what we do individually and collectively, and what we do can never be undone. It's the past now. So to summarize then, interpretation is its own unique mental process. It's unlike perception and conception, but works with perception and conception to build up selves and communities. Interpretation is triadic because it links people to their future self, to other people's thoughts and feelings, and to the future. Like time binding, interpretation spans the gulf between humans and makes selves and communities possible. And I think I'm just going to add with a footnote. It's not long, but since people are talking about AI, I have a footnote where I'm talking about, how do we deal with our new neighbor, this phenomenon? And artificial intelligence raises some interesting contemporary questions regarding this definition of interpretation. Is AI a neighbor? Does AI have a mind? I don't want to go into, the morass of theories of mind and other possibly endless philosophical whatnots, but here are a few thoughts. So AI is part of our human environment. It's part of our context. It's part of our world. AI is the result of human minds. AI traffics in human symbols. When AI passes a Turing test, it means humans will think it is a human. AI presents the findings of human minds in generative ways which can be and are interpreted. AI is as much artificial collaboration as it is artificial intelligence, and that term comes from Jaron Lanier, who wants to remind people that AI is not really an individual intelligence, it's a collective intelligence. So it's collaboration for good or ill. AI do not have bodies and perceptions of the sorts human do yet. Given the task of calculating the next highest prime number, an AI would theoretically work the problem forever, but humans would be smart enough to stop and get lunch. If an AI mind could or would arise, humans would need to be more concerned with it than it would be concerned with us. It would be very different from our own mind, whatever kind of mind we would say became conscious. AI is extremely powerful, and so until we know for sure that it's become conscious and is starting to do things so much more on its own than we think of it doing now, humans should be concerned with the minds of those humans who control, make use of, and profit off of their AI neighbors.